Welcome back, Sooner Pocket Podcast. Sam Knight here with Chris. Make sure to check out our site, www.soonerpocket.com. A lot of good content there, pregame, postgame analysis, along with some cool videos, links to videos and stuff. So pretty neat. Chris, how you doing?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Be doing better if the LSU game went differently. But hey, that Alabama game. I know we didn't do a podcast last week to talk about it after the fact. That's what I'm going to choose to focus on today. Uh, if you asked
Alabama
me,
game was something, huh?
if you had asked me at the beginning of the season, or I guess I should say, if you had asked me when we had just lost to Missouri in the way that we did, if you had asked me if I thought we could not just beat, but dominate Alabama, I probably would have laughed you out of the room. But boy, we whooped them.
What's up with our inability to keep a quarterback that beats Alabama for us?
Trevor Knight, then, yeah, and Trevor Knight, then Jackson Arnold entered the
It's
portal
like
today.
we sell the soul of our offense to beat the devil one time. I don't know. Kind
Yeah.
of weird. Kind of weird. Well, there's really like three news of the days, newses of the day, maybe. Um, there's really three of them. Jackson Arnold in the transfer portal. OU, well, as of Monday anyway. OU's recruiting class really shaped out nicely. Um, got all but one of our scholarship commits, which is great. Fasusi, five-star offensive tackle, solidified his commitment to us, signing today. And lastly, perhaps most importantly, Ben Arbuckle, the new offensive coordinator for the University of Oklahoma, going to be working with all of our existing offensive staff minus Seth Luttrell. Um, Personally, I like that. We've got a group of guys there in the offensive coaching room that are really a proven commodity to this point. I think this last season was something of an anomaly for one reason or another. I'm not sure how much of it was injury related, how much of it was the new conference, um, you know, how much of it was Seth Luttrell's direction while he was here as the main guy on the offensive side of the ball. But um, I'm looking forward to seeing what Arbuckle brings. Namely possibly his quarterback from Washington State, John Mateer.
Yeah. John Mateer is one heck of a quarterback. He's a phenomenal job in that Washington State system this year. He has yet to officially enter the portal. Of course, the feeling around all of college football is that not only is he going to enter the portal, but he's very likely going to Oklahoma so he can stay with his coordinator. You know, Ben Arbuckle, he has a phenomenal history with quarterbacks. He coached Bailey Zappi. He coached Cam Ward. He coached Cam Mateer. When you have just one, maybe two of those guys, then there's an argument for, oh, you're just benefiting from really good quarterbacks. But when it's literally every quarterback that you've ever worked with who's either A in the NFL, B one of the best in the country, or C leads the country in a certain stat, then that speaks for itself. Every quarterback at this point that he's worked with. And it's just it's really encouraging to see the hire that Brent Venables made instead of going for another OU alum that would be for fan service more than anything else. He went out and he looked for the best name he could. He went for the best coordinator he could find, and he went to the one that, with, let's be honest, not as talented players as OU, nowhere near as talented players throughout most of the offenses OU. They light up scoreboards. They dominate defenses. They confuse defenses. And it's encouraging to see that as much as an emphasis as he's put on the defense, he is also doing his best to put that same emphasis on the offense. Coaches like Lincoln Riley, who are offensive minded, or Kirk Ferentz, who are defensive minded, they so often they'll put so much emphasis on their one side of the ball, they completely neglect the other side of the ball. And so it's nice. I'm excited.
What's with all these fools going around talking about how the air raid will not work in the SEC.
It's
I'm I'm really perplexed by it.
that is that is a foolish argument, and I'll tell you why. First, if I remember correct, I saw this thing saying that this past season, Washington State ran the ball on 60% of their plays, threw it on 40%. So A, you've got a majority there. And B, look at 2019 LSU. Look at 2020 Alabama. Look at 2021 through 2024 Tennessee. Those are all I'm not sure if the LSU one would, or I guess the Alabama one would be air raid, but they are all very air heavy. Then you've got literally Mike Leach, who came into the SEC, and there were two things that kept him from being truly successful in the SEC. There's the fact that he did not recruit very well, and he did not have a defense. Not one year when he was at Mississippi State did he recruit well or have a defense. Despite that, his offenses averaged what, 400 something yards a game and like 20 to 30 something points a game in the SEC. It's a foolish argument to say that Ben Arbuckle's offense won't work in the SEC. This isn't 1945 anymore. We Half the SEC is air raid at this point. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even characterize his offense as air raid. That's the other part of it here is, at times is it air raid? Probably, yes. Is the scheme overall an air raid? I would say no. I would say the numbers don't bear that out. Like you mentioned, the 60-40 breakout from this past season for Wazoo. Um, but on the flip side of that, too, his opening, well, his press release, I should say, not really his opening statement, but his press release talks about gearing the offense around the personnel, um, not forcing the personnel into an offense, but forcing an offense into the personnel. Um, that's really smart, I think. Be interested to see how it works at OU, see if that's truly what he does, how much of that is lip service, and um, how much of it is, practical stuff that can get results. But um, man, just a lot of craziness, especially in the coaching world. I saw a headline today that Bruce Feldman broke, that UCF has apparently been in touch with Lincoln Riley about their head coach opening. It sounds like UCF is really kind of swinging at the moon a little bit. Um, doesn't sound like Lincoln Riley has necessarily reciprocated their interest, but did have a cool flashback moment. Lincoln Riley goes up on that stand today, says he's happy where he is. He's at home at USC. He's where he wants to be, and he's not going to be the next head coach at LSU.
Yeah, we've
No,
all
he
heard
didn't
that
say
one
that.
before.
Yeah, that last part, that was a lie. He didn't say that today. But the rest of it, every bit of it, it's it's 2021, November of 2021 all over again. Um, yeah, I don't know what to make of it. The most interesting part of that whole UCF thing is Gus Malzahn going to Florida State, presumably resigning in lieu of termination, but leaving UCF to go be Florida State's OC. Interesting career move for him, I think, and something that will probably not. I don't know how much that's really going to help UCF. I think UCF right now is struggling a little bit in a few key areas that um, are really vital to football, college football in 2024. NIL funding, recruiting, um, all that good business. So, how much difference does this make in the long run? I don't know. It's going to depend on who they get in there as their head coach, see if they have the ability to pull in some booster funding, the ability to recruit some really tough areas, especially here in the South. Um, it's UCF, but it's in Florida. I mean, they've got a pretty fertile recruiting ground there. Um, it's a lot they could be doing.
Yeah. And one other name that's apparently popped up in their coaching search, they're wanting to see if they can bring Scott Frost back. And if you remember, Scott Frost, he was a heck of a head coach for them. He failed miserably at Nebraska, but he was their head coach when they won the national championship in 2017. I
What's he
refuse.
doing now?
I don't know. I can find out. But he was their head coach for a while, and he did a heck of a job at UCF. That's what got him into the position he had at Nebraska. It's just unfortunate how it worked out, and it looks like right now he's not really doing anything. Oh, here we go. He joined the Rams coaching staff. Uh, have to read into that and see
Hmm,
what exactly he's doing. Uh,
it's an interesting move.
he will help out special teams coordinator Chase Blackburn as well as work with the offense and defense. So it sounds like he's an analyst for the Rams. Uh,
Yeah.
but going back to the scheming, making the offense fit your players thing that you mentioned from Ben Arbuckle, someone provided an example of that just from his time at Washington State. John Mateer is a lot more of a run heavy quarterback than Cam Ward is. Cam Ward has the ability to run. He's a good runner, but he would prefer to sit back and air it out all day, every day. He does not run near as much as John Mateer does. And we saw a noticeable change in the offense from 2023 to 2024. Uh, in 2024, there was a lot more running done by the quarterback and a lot more plays, a lot more read options, a lot more plays designed to get the quarterback running than there was last year. The quarterback this year, John Mateer, he doesn't have as many passing touchdowns as Cam Ward did last year, but he has significantly more rushing touchdowns. And so that's just one example of he has two different quarterbacks in 2 different years who are very different quarterbacks. The systems that they run are quite different, but he still finds a way to what's it called? He still finds a way to incorporate what the quarterback needs into his offense. And an example of what it means to work to your player's strength is look at John Mateer here. John Mateer always has a run threat. He always has the ability to air the ball out all over the field. And this is an example of a play where Ben Arbuckle knew that he's good with the play action fake. He's good with reading defenses and picking them apart. I mean, you see the guy go in motion right there. And look, he very quickly reads through the defense and sees a wide open guy. That's exactly what we're talking about with scheming people open. Something you could see right there is that what's his name? Ben Arbuckle. He really knows how to scheme players open. In that video, what you saw a receiver going in motion from left to right. You saw John Mateer pump fake to that receiver, and then the receivers that were lined up over here on the right, they kind of did these little. One did a post, the other did a wheel, but because of that, there's all this motion going kind of like in a U shape or in a L shape towards that right side of the field. And what that does is it confuses the defense and it gets players wide open. I mean wide open. That receiver who caught that, he couldn't get into the end zone, but there was no one around them. He could have fair caught that ball. And so seeing a scheme like that is really encouraging where you don't just have good players, but you know how to scheme them open.
Yeah. Scheming open is so much of what I feel like made OU successful during the early Lincoln Riley days. Because you look back at some of those receivers and, some of the guys that were our biggest producers, the guys that became household names and really didn't have much of a future outside of OU. You look at Lee Morris, Michael Jones, um, any of those guys really. Those are the first two that came to mind. Just kind of memorable OU players that just they were good here. They found a nice offense, a nice scheme. Um, but it's so crucial, I think, with where we are right now, with the unit that we have and the youth that we have. 80 something players returning uh, in the freshman and sophomore areas. It's so important that we help them out a little bit scheme wise and give them the ability to get open. The one thing we never really did well this year, we never opened the field up horizontally. We tried so many times to take the top off of the defense. And, I think maybe 3 or 4 times it worked throughout the whole season, which is really low for OU comparative to other seasons. But um, we never really made the defense work for it and have to be spread out. We gave them easy drop back, drop a little diagonal, cover three, Tampa two type coverages that they were able to run and mostly shut our passing game down. So little in the way of like mesh concepts, in routes, out routes, using the sideline to our advantage. Just all the things that you need to be able to get the passing game working a little bit, build your quarterback some confidence so that they can take some of those deeper shots, but also open up the run game a little bit. A tight offensive formation, you're going to end up sometimes with 8 guys maybe in the box. And with the way our offensive line was this year, 8 men in a box is almost impossible. It's a death sentence because you don't have the personnel or the skill on your offensive line right now to be running that ball. So you're in a throw only situation. In an 8-man box, you're maybe going to have 3 guys drop into coverage, or maybe there's 6 of them, 6 or 7 that'll rush you, test that offensive line and take away your ability to get any pass off. So it's going to be a nice change, I think, assuming Arbuckle's successful, opening up our offense a little bit, scheming some guys open. It's going to be big. Something else I want to touch on, Chris, the latest college football playoff rankings. Alabama set to be the last team in, and Miami poised to be the first team out. If all the favorites this weekend hold on, we'd have Oregon, Texas, SMU, and Boise State as our top 4. We'd have Arizona State or Iowa State in there as the 5 seed. They would not get a first round bye. They'd be the Big 12 champ. And after that, we'd have Penn State, Notre Dame, Georgia, Ohio State, Tennessee, Indiana, and Alabama. It is insane to me, absolutely insane, that Alabama has weaseled their way back into this playoff. I don't think there's any other team in the SEC that could have lost to this OU team 24-3 and been able to get back in the playoffs with that being their third loss. I don't see any other team where that could have happened to, who that could have happened to. And it goes to the point a lot of folks have made over the last 24 hours since this latest ranking came out. It is a battle of brands. It's not a battle of merit, not a battle of deservingness. It is a battle of brand. And right now, Alabama, and deservedly so, they are the brand. They're the penultimate brand of college football right now.
I get what you're saying. If I'm being completely honest, neither Alabama nor Miami should be in the playoffs. You've got an Alabama team with 3 losses, one of those not just losing to Oklahoma. If they lost to OU the way they lost to Vanderbilt, which, reminder, they lost to Vanderbilt. If they lost to OU the way they lost to Vanderbilt, that's one thing. But they didn't just lose to Oklahoma. They got dominated by Oklahoma. They could not run the ball effectively against us. They could not throw the ball effectively against us. Jalen Milroe, who hadn't thrown an interception in 4 or 5 games, threw 3 against us. They went up against one of the worst offenses in all of college football. According to PFF, it's the worst offense in the Power 4. And OU ran it down their throats like it was nothing. They made it look like child's play. What that showed me is Alabama is not going to be a consistent team. They are not one of the 3 best teams in the country. Then you've got one of the 3. I don't think they're one of the 12 best teams in the country. Then you've got Miami, who they remind me very much of 2017 or 2018, more likely OU. They just have this offense to the stars. It is elite every player on that offense I could see being in the NFL one day, especially that quarterback. Cam Ward, I believe, has played himself into the first round of the NFL draft this year, and I think he is the best quarterback of the NFL draft this year. The defense is terrible. Terrible, 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 terrible. They can't keep any team off the scoreboard. Yes, the Duke game ended up a blowout, but going into the fourth quarter, it was a shootout. It was still a close game. They lost to Syracuse. Who was the other team that they lost to recently? They have two losses. Who's the other team? It wasn't Syracuse. Georgia Tech. It
I
was
think
Georgia
it was
Tech.
Pitt. Oh, okay.
Georgia Tech. Uh, they lost to Georgia Tech and Syracuse, neither of whom, despite Syracuse, I think being ranked now, neither of whom I would consider very good. And they lost because their defense couldn't stop anyone. You really think that Miami defense could stop the Texas offense, could stop the Georgia, well, the Georgia offense maybe, but do you think they could stop the Oregon offense? They couldn't stop the Tennessee offense. They couldn't stop most of the ones in the college football playoff. They don't belong there either. If I'm being completely realistic here, and this would be controversial to Alabama fans, the team that I would give the nod to make the playoffs is South Carolina. South Carolina nearly beat Alabama, if you remember correctly. They whooped Oklahoma. They dominated who was at the time number 10 Texas A&M. Vanderbilt is a team that beat Alabama, almost beat Texas. They played a nice game against Tennessee. They were manhandled by South Carolina. Then South Carolina goes up against number 23 Missouri, beats them. Then they go up against Clemson this past weekend. Everyone knew that their offense was good, but they were wondering if their defense could win one of these tight defensive games. They shut the explosive Clemson offense down in the second half. Heck, they were down 14-7 at the beginning of the fourth quarter. They won 17-14. They've showed that they can go up against these really good teams. Oh, one last one. Don't forget the LSU game. LSU, they lost more games this year than they should have. They are a deceptively good team. They almost beat LSU as well, if you remember. 36-33 was the final score there. They've shown that they can go up with almost any team in the country and come out victorious. The one SEC opponent that really had their way with South Carolina was Ole Miss, who also had their way with Georgia. But they also lost to Kentucky and Florida. So Ole Miss is another one of those inconsistent teams. South Carolina, you're exactly right. They don't have the brand to make the playoffs right now, and it's annoying. It's frustrating because they are playing as well as just about anyone else in the country right now. But because it's South Carolina, they aren't going to get the bid in. They would need a whole lot of chaos to happen for them to get in. I'd put South Carolina in over Alabama or Miami. I think they've proven that they deserve it more.
I would be so on board with removing the human element from playoff selection. The NFL really, for all intents and purposes, obviously it's designed by humans. So you're going to have some that there's always going to be something of a human element. But to give it an NFL style setup where there's a set criteria for you to get in there, there's no at large this, at large that. There's very little brand preference. If there was a way to do that just with the Power Four teams, the cream of the crop of college football, that's something I would like to see, because I think you'd see more teams that probably deserve to be there getting in. Alabama, to your point, Alabama and Miami do not deserve to be there. So I'd be interested to see some teams that might get in that kind of a format, depending on how many teams you put into it, if it's 12, 14, whatever. But I think there's got to be a way to incentivize beating your schedule and winning games that doesn't rely on brand. So that's my 2 cents on that. Before we wrap up here real quick, I want to touch on conference championship weekend. Number 16, Iowa State, facing off in Arlington against number 15, Arizona State. Winner is in the playoffs. We've got Arizona State as a 2-point favorite. Um, I like Iowa State in this one to pull off the upset and get their first ever postseason bid. Your thoughts?
Iowa State is a good team. Iowa State's a really good team. Arizona is hot right now. And it's not always the best team that wins, but the hottest team. But
Arizona
even
State.
then, yes, I'm picking Arizona State. Arizona State, I honestly think they're the better team and the hotter team. The Cam Skeetabo, he's playing on another level. Give me Arizona State.
I like it. Texas, Georgia, number 2, potentially 2 out of 3, depending on how the playoff seeding goes. I've got Texas pulling off the win here in the rematch. I like to think this would be an upset. It's technically not. Texas is higher ranked, and they are a 2.5-point favorite. I think Texas probably learns from some of what they did against Georgia the first time around, and I think they pull this one off.
I've got Georgia. Uh,
I
Georgia
would expect that.
Georgia went to Texas's home field and dominated them. This is a neutral setting, so it's not going to be as intimidating of a place for them to play. Uh, Give me Georgia all day. On top of that, both teams have regressed, I feel, a little bit since that game. Neither team, I feel like, is playing as good right now as they were around that time. But I think Texas's regression is a little bit more noticeable than Georgia's. Georgia's their defense is struggling, their offense kind of struggles to get going, but it's the same story kind of as the what's it called as the Georgia game or as the Texas game. Once they get going, which they tend to get going around the second quarter or the beginning of the second half, you cannot stop them. Once their defense figures their stuff out, you aren't getting by them. And when their offense gets their stuff figured out, you can't stop them. Georgia Tech, I think they had to pull out just pretty much every trick in the book to keep Georgia from winning that game in regulation. But I give me Georgia all day. Give me Georgia.
I will say on that, it sounds like you're basically saying both teams right now are playing down to their competition, playing down to the level of their opponent. If you've got these two facing off and both of them are playing that way, it's going to be Texas 7 out of 7 days of the week, because I think Texas's ceiling is a bit higher than Georgia's is right now. And I feel like this has been probably an uncharacteristic year for Georgia that's probably got them a little down, and they don't really have a clear leader, maybe like they've had in years past. Um, so that would be my thought. If these teams are like you say they are, I think that only strengthens the case for Texas.
We'll see.
Big Ten, number 3, Penn State, 3.5 dog against the top ranked Oregon Ducks. I don't see this one being close. I think Penn State's going to get kicked out of there. I think you're looking at probably a 31-14 type victory, 31-10 for Oregon.
I'm right there with you. Penn State, they have a nice enough offense, but they don't have an offense to compete in the big leagues.
ACC championship, Clemson facing off against SMU. SMU, a 2.5-point favorite. I think SMU takes this game to Clemson and puts Clemson out of their misery this season.
I agree. SMU, they haven't had the consistency at quarter, or they didn't start off with the consistency at quarterback that they would have liked to, but they've been solid. They've been really good. When they've needed their defense has stepped up. When they've needed their offense has stepped up. It's a really solid group out there. And I don't see a way that Clemson can win this game. I think SMU is they're a little too well coached.
Last one, the Friday Conference Championship. Mountain West got Boise State 10th ranked right now, UNLV 20th ranked. Boise State 4.5 point favorite. Do we think Brennan Marion's go offense can take UNLV over Boise State? I don't. I think Ashton Jeanty probably um, puts it away late in the game. I think UNLV is going to come out with the game plan to shut him down. So his first half will probably be a little rough. Second half, he's going to take it to the um, what are they? What is UNLV? The Rebels.
Rebels.
I think he's going to take it to the Rebels, and yeah, but Boise State all the way in that one.
I agree with you. And don't forget, this isn't the first time they're meeting. They met back in October. Boise State won 29-24. Of course, it took a touchdown in the fourth quarter that gave Boise State the lead, but they didn't give it back. After that, Brennan Marion, he has a really good offense, but I don't think it's going to end up being enough to overcome Ashton Jeanty. Ashton Jeanty this year has more yards after contact running the ball than any other running back has yards, period. I think there's only so much you can do to stop that defensively. UNLV, heck, I remember in that game, they were talking about how UNLV shut down Ashton Jeanty. And this should tell you all that you need to know about Ashton Jeanty. Their definition of shut down, 33 rushes for 128 yards and a touchdown. If that's shut down, give that to me every day of the week. But I've got Boise State winning this one, punching a ticket to their first college football playoff.
What's going to be interesting is if some of these underdogs win, because it would really complicate things for Alabama. Ward Manuel, playoff chair last night, said that nothing will change with respect to placement for the teams that aren't playing this weekend in relation to the teams that are playing. So that would tell me if UNLV upsets Boise State stays ahead of Alabama, then UNLV will be in the playoff as a ranked conference champion. If Clemson beats SMU in a pretty close game, number 17 Clemson is in the playoff, and number 8 SMU, by that logic, should stay ahead of Alabama. And ACC would have two teams in there. Alabama would get left out in that scenario. That's really it. It would come down to those two. Alabama needs to be rooting for Boise State and for SMU in those, because if even one of those two pulls off the upset, UNLV or Clemson, I think the Tide probably get left out.
Yeah, I could very easily see that happening. And honestly, I kind of hope it does. A sad little elephant is always happy to see. Yeah, I'm always happy to see.
Sooner Pocket Podcast. I'm Sam Knight with Chris Knight. Make sure to check out our site here, www.soonerpocket.com. A lot of great content. Been a rough season, but we made it. It's on to the bowl game. Wherever we end up, whoever we end up playing. Boomer Sooner. Stay safe.
Boomer Sooner.